Have you ever hated someone? I don't mean this weird appropriation of the word that's used loosely to describe some minor inconvenience you suffered in real life or saw in a social media post. I'm talking about the type of seething, burning hatred that leads you to take the most irrational course of action possible at the mere sight and sound of something that gnaws at the very core of your being, at the essence of everything that you believe in. In sports, you hear the word rivalry get thrown around a lot. Showdowns such as the New Zealand All Blacks versus South Africa Springboks in rugby, El Superclásico between River Plate and Boca Juniors, Duke versus North Carolina in college basketball, any clash between the AFC North Division teams and the NFL, the Iron Bowl between Alabama and Auburn in college football, among many others that are deserving of that definition. But what if I told you that in the southernmost part of Brazil, there exists a football derby, a fixture that has existed for more than a century, that has exceeded the realm of a rivalry far, far long ago. The Gre-Nal and the emotions it evokes in the two teams that play it, Grêmio Futebol Porto Alegrense and Esporte Clube Internacional, are difficult for many to fathom, especially when it comes to the level of contempt involved. But in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, it's something which you are guaranteed to witness at least twice a year, and if you happen to live in the city of Porto Alegre, you're most likely someone who partakes in watching this theater of loathing and all of its acts. For 115 years, this derby has been the stage for some of Brazil's greatest and most infamous matches in its entire footballing history. Giants of the sport of both national and international fame have etched their names in lore due to the moments they created in these clashes. Championships on a state, national, and continental level have been decided in these showdowns, affecting the landscape of Brazilian and South American football in the process. But throughout it all, one thing has remained constant since the first time these two clubs met on July 18, 1909. Hatred. But hatred is not something in which you are born with, but something that you are taught. The Gre-Nal derby between Grêmio and Internacional is more than just a football rivalry. It is a heated affair that has deeply divided the city of Porto Alegre, fueled by generations of cultural, social, and sporting tensions. So throughout this video, let us dive deep into the roots of what turned a state rivalry into one of the most heated and historic sport clashes on the face of the planet. The Gre-Nal. In order to learn how Grêmio and Internacional got to this point, we first have to talk about how both clubs were created. All of this began back on September 7th, 1903, during an exhibition game being played in Porto Alegre by Brazil's oldest active football club, Esporte Clube Rio Grande. During the game, the ball the club was playing with ended up deflating through the course of the game. And that was a problem, since that was the club's only football. Lucky for them, an entrepreneur from Sorocaba, São Paulo named Cândido Dias da Silva happened to be in attendance, and he always happened to bring along his letter ball with him, as he'd begun to do in Porto Alegre over weekends with the locals while introducing them to the game he'd learned in his home state. He was more than eager to let the Rio Grande players borrow his ball to continue their exhibition. In return for his generosity, at the end of the match, Cândido and some of the other locals watching the exhibition were allowed to pick the brains of the Rio Grande players about the sport of football in general, and most importantly, about something that had been on Cândido's mind for some time: how to go about creating a club. Motivated and encouraged by what he learned, a week later, on September 15, 1903, Cândido Dias and 31 other men gathered together at Salão Grau, a local restaurant in the Centro Histórico neighborhood of Porto Alegre, and they founded Grêmio Futebol Porto Alegrense. Due to their blue, black, and white color scheme, they would eventually be also known as the Tricolor. Carlos Luis Borer was elected as the club's first president, Cândido Dias became the club's treasurer, and one common factor among the 32 founders was that the majority of them were part of the city's German community. For context here, while the immigration of Germans to Brazil peaked during the post-World War I era, it began taking place initially during the 1820s, and Rio Grande do Sul ended up becoming one of the biggest hubs of German immigration in the process, which explains how a majority of Grêmio's founders happen to be of German descent and with roots in that community. As the game grew further in Rio Grande do Sul during the 1900s, there was the noticeable fact that most known football clubs were linked to sectors of the local upper bourgeoisie, who were extremely restrictive of who exactly got to play in their clubs at the time. In other words, they restricted those clubs to only members of the German communities, and those who didn't fit those parameters were mostly rejected. This phenomena hadn't gone unnoticed, as three men of Italian roots found themselves confronted with this very reality in the late 1900s: Henrique Poppy Leão, José Eduardo Poppy, and Luiz Madeira Poppy. The Poppy brothers arrived in Porto Alegre from the city of São Paulo sometime in the 1900s and quickly immersed themselves within the city and its various communities. The younger siblings, José and Luiz, had the desire to play football, a sport they learned to practice in São Paulo. Henrique, the older and more influential brother due to his job as a journalist, eventually was the one who orchestrated the creation of a new club in which they could play. Meetings began to take place for the creation of this new club in the more humble areas of Porto Alegre in Cidade Baixa and the Centro Histórico neighborhoods, with a simple statement that this would be a club that would be inclusive to various ethnic backgrounds, contrary to the likes of Grêmio. Thus, on April 4th, 1909, Sporting Clube Internacional was born. The club's name was picked to represent its inclusivity plus pay homage to the Paulista club in which the Poppy brothers had initially played before their move to Rio Grande do Sul. Internacional's red and white colors were inspired by the street carnaval of Porto Alegre, where a vote by its initial members saw them picking the red Veneziano's trope colors over the Sociedade Esmeralda's green and white. Their color choice would see the team eventually become known as the Colorados. João Leopoldo Serafim would be elected as the club's first president, Henrique Poppy Leão would assume the role of speaker for the club, and his brother José would be the club's first ever captain. Within months of their inception, Internacional would play their first ever game against none other than Grêmio. In fact, they had been the ones to extend the invitation to Grêmio to be their first opponents in a game that was set to happen on June 27, 1909. But then Grêmio realized they had a previous game against Foosball Porto Alegre previously arranged. But to Henrique Augusto Koch, Grêmio's president at the time, that wasn't a problem, as he suggested that his team could face Internacional with their reserve team on the set date. The leaders of Internacional were not happy with entertaining the idea, demanding that their opponents play them with their first team. Now, Grêmio's board did agree, but due to their previous commitment, the game against Internacional would have to wait another month. Not exactly the best of first impressions, to say the least. The game would eventually be rescheduled for July 18, 1909. It would take place in the Baixada, where an estimated 2,000 people would bear witness to the first ever Gre-Nal. While the rivalry name didn't exist at the time, the results of this game would most certainly plant the first seeds of hatred, as Grêmio proceeded to humiliate Internacional by beating them 10-0. Turns out that Germans beating Brazilians by astronomical margins on the pitch wasn't exactly just a 2014 thing. Striker Edgar Booth made history by being the first ever goal scorer in this derby with a goal in the 10th minute of the game, before adding 4 more to his tally on the day. It was a landslide victory, to say the least, but both teams would be seeing more of each other going forward, as the Campeonato Citadino de Porto Alegre was established in 1910, a competition that would be the predecessor to the more known Campeonato Gaúcho, which is Rio Grande do Sul's state championship competition in the modern era. Grêmio would proceed to demolish Internacional over the next 2 years, including a 10-1 win in 1911 that had Internacional player-coach Carlos Clue state, "I can only leave this football thing after a victory over this Grêmio." But while Internacional were getting better throughout the 1910s, it just so happened that Grêmio did have their number in their head-to-head matches. That was, at least, until October 31st, 1915. The Colorados have finally claimed their first win over the Tricolor in their own ground with a crowd of roughly 4,000 people or so watching. One of Internacional's founders and eventual team president, Antenor Lemos, was said to be shouting, "The seal is broken! The seal is broken!" as they celebrated an absolutely incredible moment in the club's young history. A rivalry doesn't truly begin until each side of it proves that they can beat the other, and after 6 years of existence, Sporting Clube Internacional had finally arrived at the starting line. Time would march on, and with the more games they were played in between these two clubs, the more heated those matches got. With each encounter, the pendulum gradually swung from Grêmio being the dominant team to now Internacional having their number. But on August 4, 1918, well, an event occurred during their match which would interlock these two clubs together beyond occupying the same state. The game saw Grêmio take a 1-0 lead, and during the first half, the ball would go out of play for a throw-in in the 43rd minute. Both teams got into an argument as to who the throw-in belonged to. Back then, there wasn't anything dividing the pitch from the stands, and within that argument, a fight between the two sets of fans broke out in the stands. In the chaos, a Grêmio supporter named Manuel Costa entered the pitch and drew a knife. Inter midfielder Álvaro Ribas saw this and he attempted to de-escalate the situation. And he got attacked by the fan for his troubles, including getting stabbed in the thigh. The situation led to the game being thrown out as pandemonium occurred. 100 people were injured in the process, and Grêmio refused to play a rescheduled leg, which meant Internacional got the points for it in the state championship they were in, even if the Tricolor had been leading the derby at the time. The violence which occurred on that day solidified the bubbling dislike that had been growing between these two teams and their fan bases even further.
Because from now on, we're enemies.
Okay.
It wasn't until a few years after the 1918 incident and a few more heated matches that the Gre-Nal finally got its official name, as journalist Ivo dos Santos Martins, who happened to be a gremista, got really sick and tired of having to write out both teams' names and created the term to make it easy on himself in 1926. As the years went on and these two teams grew ever more entangled in their battles on the football pitch, there are some key moments that have to be unraveled to truly understand how this rivalry turned into an all-consuming hatred. Because in football, you can't talk about two opposing teams in their on-field wars without delving into the two clubs' operations and the respective fan bases that they drew in. It was around 1927 when Internacional had opened its doors to athletes from other leagues, including black and mestizo players from the Canela Preta League, after winning their first state championship. It was another important staple in the club's history, as they solidified the name they'd given themselves in 1909 as a club that embraced any and all, becoming eventually known as the Clube do Povo, or the People's Club, on the back of such a policy. An essential figure in the mythos of Sporting Clube Internacional was a man named Vicente Hall. He was a former reserves player for Internacional in the 1920s, turned local celebrity via his time as the city of Porto Alegre's King Momo, a symbolic figure and party host who led carnival celebrations for 2 decades. In 1940, Vicente Hall took his experience of carnival balls and parades to the stands in order to create Internacional's first supporters group, the Departamento de Cooperação e Propaganda, or DCP. The DCP were a group that became pioneers in Brazilian football due to their use of horns, banners, streamers, and firecrackers to cheer on their club, combining both sport and carnival into one gargantuan party each time their team took to the field. The result of embracing diversity in their talent pool of players and having a raucous crowd bringing the party atmosphere to each of their games was that Internacional would see one of its winningest eras in the 1940s. Their hyper-offensive playstyle and consistent dominance in the Gre-Nal led to multiple state championships, dominance over Grêmio in their clashes, and that particular era's team to be coined as the Rolo Compressor. Oh, and a quick fun fact for non-Portuguese speakers, Rolo Compressor means steamroller. I just wanted to translate that one quite literally because of what you're going to see next. Yes, that was a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure reference, and no, I will not explain it any further. Mainly because I needed a transition to go to the other side of the rivalry here and focus back on Grêmio before the Tricolor fans try to come after me in the comments. While Internacional embraced a different approach on all areas when it came to their team, Grêmio chose to keep to their traditionalist roots when constructing their roster of players and their fan culture during that same time frame. They established themselves as a team that could win against their state rivals, teams such as Santos and Flamengo, and they were even taking the leap to travel and defeat teams abroad, as they played club teams across Uruguay, Colombia, and Mexico during that era. It was also during the 1940s that the phrase "Com Grêmio onde o Grêmio estiver" became a rallying cry for their fandom, to signify that they'd travel wherever and whenever if it meant seeing their club. The Tricolor's conquest of the Americas tour during the 1949 to mid-1950s period was instrumental in helping prove that Brazilian football on a club level was above anything currently in the Western Hemisphere, a concept in which Pelé's Santos teams would take to the absolute extreme just a few years later in their world tours. During the stretch of their tour, Grêmio would also make continental history, as they were the first Brazilian team to ever defeat Boca Juniors in the legendary La Bombonera Stadium on February 25, 1959, giving their Argentinian hosts a 4-1 shellacking in the process. Although for Grêmio, those triumphs and the growth of their fanbase achieved via their traditional approach did not come without their tribulations and some controversy. While Grêmio does have history with bringing in players with African descent during its early years such as Álvaro Antunes, Adão Lima, and others, it was much more limited than their crosstown foes and seemingly moves that were often met with resistance from their own directors. It wasn't until 1952 where the Tricolor fully rescinded their long-standing policy of restricting the club to most black and mestizo players by signing Osmar Fortes Barcelos, better known as Tesourinha, from Vasco da Gama. It was an impact signing for the Tricolor in many facets, both in the fact that it was a renowned black player joining the club, but also one that used to play for their heated rivals in Internacional during their era of local dominance in the 1940s. Between the two clubs, their different viewpoints in their acceptance of black and mestizo players were another point that bred further contempt early in the rivalry's history. For example, Internacional's identity to embrace those players was portrayed quite negatively in newspapers and media at the time in comparison to their Tricolor rivals. To further pour more gasoline in the fire, Internacional's DCP supporters group and the way in which they cheered for their club was dismissed entirely by Grêmio's fans, who proceeded to call it Creole stuff, and yes, they even went as far as referring to those types of fans as monkeys due to their jumping and raucous nature of cheering for their club. These sorts of jarring insults only sowed the seeds of hatred between them even further. But in time, Grêmio eventually decided to join in on the fun, and when they finally held their first fireworks display, at a Gre-Nal to boot, well, Vicente Hall was already aware of the novelty that was to come, and at the first burst from Grêmio supporters area, he immediately opened the banner that he had rolled up with a very provocative question towards the Grêmio supporters.
Imitando o crioulo, hein?
They do say imitation is the best form of flattery.
Got him. We got him.
While going about it in different manners in order to achieve the best result possible, The ways in which both these clubs involved in the Gre-Nal represented themselves at their stadiums would continue to be diverse and further enrich their identities as some of the biggest clubs in all of Brazil. Internacional's roots being among black folks and the poor in the state of Rio Grande do Sul was something they continued to embrace as time went on, including the Estádio Beira-Rio having the Coreia, which was a sector of the stadium where the ticket was only 1 Brazilian real, or at times open to the general public free of charge, in which fans would flood to in order to watch their beloved club. Their Camisa 12 organized fan base was also founded by Vicente Rao along with others in the late 1960s. Some of the most striking features for Camisa 12 are their use of samba drum beats, along with the use of large flags with bamboo poles and its members wearing white and red predominantly. For my North American audience, think something similar to the whole 12-man phenomenon in American football that the likes of the NFL Seattle Seahawks have with the 12s, or college football's Texas A&M University's student section being known as the home of the 12 men. But to Grêmio's credit, their own style of rooting for and supporting their local club was something that evolved with time as well. Geographically, the state of Rio Grande do Sul borders both Uruguay and Argentina, and with their constant trips to said neighbors' stadiums and friendlies and even the Copa Libertadores over the years, it wasn't long until Grêmio took inspiration from their hinchadas and barra bravas to form the Geral do Grêmio in the early 2000s. The first barra brava in Brazil, which became one of the biggest supporter groups in the entire country. They had also adopted the Avalanche celebration from their South American counterparts, where fans would run down the lower stands, pressing against the fans when a goal scored as a way to also embrace the players in celebration at the Estádio Olímpico Monumental, and for a time, at the Arena do Grêmio, until the celebration was banned after an incident in 2013 where the fences gave way during the avalanche and people were injured. Along with the Geral, there have been many other supporter groups past and present for the Tricolor, but arguably, the most historically important group in the Grenal's history as a whole was the Gay, which is recognized to be Brazil's first LGBTQ+ supporter group. The group was founded in 1977 by Volmar Santos, owner of the gay nightclub Coliseu. Santos, who said he was always a diehard Grêmio fan, invited the club's regulars to join the new fan club. During their existence, they suffered homophobic behavior from rival teams' fans, and even repression by the Brazilian military dictatorship's government at the time. Despite that, the group was relatively accepted by Grêmio's regular fans and supporters as their founding coincided with the end of a long drought and a streak of titles, which gave Colligate the fame of being a lucky charm for the club. The group closed in 1983, but its legacy has since been adopted by newer fans, as a series of recent productions, including books, newspaper articles, and academic papers, have been produced about Colligate, highlighting their pioneering spirit and their fight against machismo and homophobia during the civil-military dictatorship. They went about it in different ways, but the passion for football was shown from both clubs in Porto Alegre as their teams became titans on the field. But it should be noted that the history for both Internacional and Grêmio's fandoms do have some not-so-kind historical notes in certain chants, songs, and overall conduct throughout the years. Grêmio paid a heavy price in 2014 when racist chants against Santos goalkeeper Aranha led to their expulsion from the Copa do Brasil. It should be noted, however, that even with their different roots, fans from all social classes, races, and sexual preferences are supporters of both clubs in recent times. But even with the fandom for both Grêmio and Internacional being diverse across both sides of the spectrum, that has not quelled the rivalry. It has only intensified it. In every great feud, there will always be a desire to one-up your rival. A theme that transcends sports and is deeply rooted across pop culture. Take, for example, the never-ending rivalry between Red and Blue, or Ash Ketchum and Gary Oak if you only watch the anime. in the original Pokemon games. Red and Blue's constant battles throughout their story to prove who is the better trainer, from when they first picked their Pokemon in Pallet Town, all the way to their final showdown at the Indigo Plateau to determine the Pokemon League champion, mirrors the same obsessive drive seen between these two Porto Alegre clubs whose kit colors match said characters' canonical names. Whether on the pitch or in the Pokemon League, the desire to outdo your rival is a powerful motivator. Off the pitch, it's about which crowds can bring in the best atmosphere to their home stadiums and how they have evolved with the times to do so. On the football pitch, it became about which team in the Gre-Nal could claim bragging rights against one another and against all other teams surrounding them. As we've talked about before, Grêmio built their infamy and ambitions based on sticking to core values and expanding their brand beyond Brazil, while Internacional embraced the idea of a more open football club when it came to its players in order to outduel their own rivals and gain dominance within their backyard, as they do hold a winning record over the Tricolor as of the time of this video in said derby. From 1955 until 1997, the Campeonato Gaúcho was won by either Internacional or Grêmio, with one team beating the other for said bragging rights in most of those occasions. In fact, the last final of the Campeonato Gaúcho that did not have either one of these teams being a part of it was 1954. As of the time of this video, there have been 443 total Grenals played. Recounting every single one of those clashes would have us here for hours that neither you nor I currently have. But there have been certain games and events across these 443 matches that have further contributed to turning this local rivalry into something so intense that there's a literal radio station in Porto Alegre that is solely dedicated to covering these two teams alone and nothing else. When it comes to the off-the-pitch aspect of this rivalry, we already covered the 1918 stabbing incident earlier on, but scenes of conflicts and fights involving fans from either side have continued to occur throughout the Gre-Nal's history. It's not uncommon in recent years to see clips of ultras from both sides ending up in fights in the street before or even after these matches. The stands of their respective stadiums have also been the stage for chaotic moments that amplified their hatred, as Grêmio supporters in 2006 threw chemical toilets into the ditch that separates the pitch from the stands at the Estádio Beira-Rio and then set fire to them. But in 2022, the violence between these two fan bases even went as far as cancelling and postponing a Gre-Nal for the first time in its history, after fans of Internacional attacked Grêmio's bus with iron bars and rocks on its way to Estádio Beira-Rio and sent one of Grêmio's players in Paraguayan midfielder Matias Villasanti to the hospital. The off-pitch animosity has often mirrored the high-stakes drama on the field, because when you have more than a century of history playing football against one another, you're bound to have a few key clashes that also contributed to the bad blood, defining seasons and deepening the rivalry's storied and contentious history. Some examples immediately come to mind, such as the opening of Grêmio's legendary stadium, the Estádio Olímpico Monumental, being christened by Internacional beating them 6-2 in the first Gre-Nal it hosted on September 26, 1954. Or how about the Colorados' debut of an all-red kit, shorts, and socks combination on November 6, 1977 that was spoiled by the Tricolor beating them to a pulp 4-0 in the Estádio Beira-Rio? Or how about celebrations from both teams after winning important games, raising literal cardboard coffins painted in the other team's colors, causing post-game brawls in its aftermaths? Along with hatred, one-upmanship has been the name of the game in these encounters, as many of these games would be title deciders in the Campeonato Gaúcho, key games in either the Campeonato Brasileiro or Copa do Brasil, and in more recent years, games with stakes on a continental level. So I feel this is as good of a time as any to talk about March 12, 2020. Porto Alegre and Arena do Grêmio would play hosts to the first Gre-Nal to ever happen in the Copa Libertadores. Due to the pandemic, CONMEBOL had begun to suspend all other competition games, and this meant that Grêmio and Internacional would be the last game played in the competition before the suspension. And with that, all eyes across the continent would be on their encounter. The game itself was nothing to write home about, as both teams could not capitalize on their chances to score, and the final score would end up being a 0-0 draw. If that game had only just been the 0-0 draw, then the Gre-Nal's arrival at the biggest stage of South American football would have been what we in Brazil call muito barulho por nada. A whole lot of noise for nothing, or in a more North American/European style saying, it'd have been all sizzle but no steak. However, by this point, we've covered the roots of this rivalry. We've gone over the different paths that both clubs have taken on and off the pitch to get here, and now, this was the biggest stage in which they could possibly ask for to showcase their passion for their badge and just how much more they wanted it than the other. So, at the 85th minute mark, Grêmio's Pepe was fouled by Internacional's Moises as he was headed down the right wing. But what sparked widespread confusion was its aftermath, when Moises further escalated it by hitting Pepe from below without the ball. Pushing and shoving promptly followed, players on Grêmio's bench cleared out to get at Moises, and Internacional's bench followed suit. The referee struggled to get control after the confusion began, as it took about 5 minutes or so for him to start handing out red cards to those players who began to escalate this whole incident, sending 4 of them off, including the 2 men who started it. But that didn't quell the trash talking between the players on both sides, and tensions finally arrived at a boiling point, as one of Grêmio's reserves in Paulo Miranda went after Moises for his earlier shenanigans with Pepe. The Grêmio defender was gradually surrounded by Inter players, and then outright fighting broke out between both clubs. The crowd inside the Arena do Grêmio was on their feet, roaring in approval at seeing their beloved Tricolor not backing down an inch from the visiting Colorados. Armored police made their way to the sidelines, and 4 more players were eventually sent off with red cards by the referee, as attempts were made to regain control of this football game in order to finish it. For 12 minutes, the game was stopped as the equivalent of a fight inside of a Roman Colosseum took place instead of a football match, and the entire South American continent finally got to see firsthand what Brazil had known about for over a century. The Gre-Nal is one of the biggest football rivalries in the entire world. And in their hatred for one another, we do have to touch on the very fact that these 2 clubs are unironically obsessed with the downfall of the other. In the Gre-Nal, it's not good enough to just do well. It's about making sure that your sworn enemy is in the mud afterward. To both Grêmio and Internacional, if they cannot be the ones to win whatever competition they're playing in, well, so long as it's not their arch rivals winning it, they're happy, and they are more than willing to partake in laughing at said rival struggles if one team is having a particularly bad year.
Torcendo pro Grêmio pelo jeito, né?
Eu tô torcendo que dê briga.
It's pettiness taken to the extreme by 2 clubs who have dominated their entire state footballing scene, winning trophies at just about every level of competition they've played in during their years of existence. Yet, it doesn't change the fact that when Grêmio and Internacional fans see their hated foes on the calendar each year, the city of Porto Alegre divides in 2 each time that the Gre-Nal takes place. Buses of fans from one team's stadium to their rivals is being escorted by Brazil's federal police, and shutting down the roads leading to it is commonplace. Whether it's the Beira-Rio or Arena do Grêmio, you're guaranteed a full house each time these 2 giants of the South clash against one another. Some might say that prioritizing such a heated rivalry over everything else acts like a poisoned chalice for both clubs as they try to win competitions outside of their state. Both giants of the Gaúcho haven't had a whole lot to celebrate when compared to the rest of their fellow Brazilian teams. Neither club in the Gre-Nal has won the Campeonato Brasileiro in the 21st century. Grêmio's conquests of the Copa do Brasil and Copa Libertadores in 2016 and 2017 respectively have been offset almost entirely by a relegation stint to Serie B in 2022, and Internacional has not won a major trophy since their 2010 Copa Libertadores win. It's a reality in which Grêmio and Internacional struggle with, but for as much as there is a desire to conquer those accolades, it almost comes secondary. Colorados will gladly point out their slight advantage in head-to-head in the Grenals throughout the history, while the Tricolor may point to the overall success across all of Brazil in their recent streak of Campeonato Gaúcho title wins that almost has them caught up to their rivals. In the Grenal, anything less than giving it 100% and winning feels like a betrayal of everything they stand for, everything they've ever shouted for in those stands. After all, you can't be one of the biggest rivalries in the world of football if you don't have enough passion to shut down your rivals when they are right across from you on the pitch. Thus, much like the Gaúcho society in Rio Grande do Sul has always had its political and social divisions as the driving force behind its history through its various conflicts, this will continue to be reflected in the modern day with each and every time that Internacional and Grêmio play one another. As journalist Fabiano Baldasso once put it in a wonderful video done by the folks at Peleja regarding the Gre-Nal, a rivalry is when another's life is intertwined, connected, and it matters to your life. The stages where these games occur on a yearly basis will change. The generations who pick a side, buy a kit, and go to the stadiums to root for their favorite club will change. But in the city of Porto Alegre, no matter the time or the circumstances, there will always be one consistent thing: the Gre-Nal, and the hatred between the two teams playing it.